Hello and welcome. Education is not intended to find out what people are good at. That might sound strange, but it comes from one of the leading figures in education development, who also feels there needs to be something of a revolution in the way young people are taught. In most public education systems around the world, children are taught in a streamlined way, with a focus that is mostly centered on mathematics and sciences, with subjects such as art, music and dance taking a backseat. Children are rarely taught to follow their talents, whatever they may be. Critics worry that over the years, this method of learning has become institutionalized and carries over to the corporate world, where innovation may be targeted, but imagination is not embraced. Education expert and author Ken Robinson has written and spoken extensively on the subject of pursuing creativity. Here he is at the Technology, Entertainment and Design Conference, known as TED, a couple of years ago.
Every education system on Earth has the same hierarchy of subjects. Everyone, doesn't matter where you go. You'd think it would be otherwise, but it isn't. At the top are mathematics and languages, then the humanities, and at the bottom are the arts, everywhere on Earth. And in pretty much every system, too, there's a hierarchy within the arts. Art and music are normally given a higher status in schools than drama and dance. There isn't an education system on the planet that teaches dance every day to children the way we teach them mathematics. Why? Why not? I think this is rather important. I think maths is very important, but so is dance. Children dance all the time if they're allowed to. We all do. We all have bodies, don't we? You know, did I miss a meeting? I mean, I think...
Well, on today's show, we look at the challenge of educating creatively. Has the system become all about the conformity and not about diversity? Has school killed creativity? Join us with your views. Well, I'm honoured to be joined by Sir Ken Robinson, who's advised governments, Global 500 companies and some of the world's leading cultural organisations. In 1998, he led a national commission on creativity, education and economy for the British government and was involved in the peace process for Northern Ireland. In June 2003, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for his outstanding achievements. Sir Ken's the author of several books. The newest, The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything, comes out in January 2009. Sir Ken Robinson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Riz. It's a pleasure.
Good to have you, sir. Now, I've got to start off by asking why you think the education system is failing us.
Well, I think the heart of it is that most education systems around the world were invented quite recently. They were mainly invented in the 19th century to meet the needs of industrialism. And in almost every way, they are modelled on the values, ideas and interests of an industrial economy. And for the most part, they ignore the nature of individual talent and ability. So it's those two things. I think they don't address individual talent as well as they should, and they're locked in an old model.
I know you believe that across the world there's a crisis in human resources. Now, explain that a little bit to us, but also let me know if you blame that entirely on the educational system.
Well, first, no, I don't blame it on the educational system totally. And I should say, you know, I work a lot with education systems. I work with teachers, school systems. I'm a great admirer of educators. I've worked with them, and I am one, you know, so I'm not going to attack my own profession. But the whole system, I say, is modelled in an old idea of talent, an old idea of, particularly an old idea of intelligence and of economic need and purpose. And I don't therefore think that education systems deliberately suppress individual talent. It's not deliberate, but it is systematic. You know, I've lost track of the numbers of people I've met, very brilliant people often, who went through the whole of their education and never discovered a thing they were good at. And an awful lot of people think they're not good at anything.
Now, we had an email that came in, interesting comment from Italy, and if I can put this to you, Stefano Bastiani says, European schools do not kill creativity, and I wonder if you can make a fair comparison between the education systems around the world. How do they compare?
Well, let me first say a word about the nature of creativity. Creativity, I think of as the process of having original ideas, you know, original ideas that have value. And there are a lot of misconceptions about it. One of them is that it's about special people. You know, that it's a rare thing. The truth is that everybody has enormous creative capacities. It's as natural as learning to speak, to have original ideas. The problem is it gets weaned out of us, it gets suppressed. The second misconception, it's about special things. You know, it's about the arts, for example. Well, it is about the arts. I've worked in the arts most of my life. I'm a huge admirer of the creative achievements of artists, and it's a great tragedy that the arts aren't given a better place in schools. But this isn't just about the arts. You know, you can be creative in science, in math, in everything. So it's a whole system argument. And the third thing is that people think that there's nothing much you can do about this. You know, you're creative or you're not. And to me, that would be like people saying you're either literate or you're not. You know, you can read or write or you can't.
Right.
When people say they can't read and write, you know, you don't believe them to be saying I'm incapable. What you understand them to be saying is I never was taught how to do that. I don't know what's involved. And I think it's the same thing with creativity. So I don't think that this is unique to one system. I travel a lot internationally. I work a lot globally. I think most education systems, one way or another, suppress creative capacities. And I think it's a tragedy for individuals. I think it's a catastrophe, honestly, for the future of our economies and for our communities.
Interesting, you and the futurist ALVIN TOFFLER, who I had on the show a few months ago, echo the same idea that this issue of outdated education not being in sync with the modern world. I want you to listen to this before we get a comment on it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, while business is speeding up, you've got education systems that are still preparing kids to work in factories doing old-fashioned assembly work. That's why kids have to show up on time, because in a factory, if you don't show up on time on the assembly line, you hold up the work of 1,000 or 10,000 other people. So you have to be on time. You march from classroom to classroom when the bell rings. You do rote and repetitive work. That's all a description of yesterday's industrial society and economy. But it's not today. It's not where we're going.
Now, I know that you and ALVIN TOFFLER are friends, and when leading thinkers like you echo this idea, why doesn't someone pay attention? Why has the education system not addressed this issue of being outdated?
I think education systems are addressing it. You know, the problem is that most policymakers, I don't want to generalize here, Riz, you know, but let's say just most policymakers, when they come to think about education, tend to think the problem is simply raising standards. You know, almost every education system on earth is being reformed at the moment. Almost everywhere you go, it's true across Europe, the Middle East, South America, India, America. The problem is that education doesn't need to be reformed, it needs to be transformed, because it's locked into this old model, as ALVIN TOFFLER says. And you can see it in a couple of ways. One of them is in this hierarchy of subjects. There's no question that in most school systems, some subjects are thought to be more important than other ones. And that's why a lot of people go through the system never discovering their real talents, because they're not good at the subjects which are given high status very often. But the second is, it's really very much about conformity. You know, it's about standardizing a great deal. You see it increasingly, this emphasis on standardized testing. And all of that is in place partly because the old system required people to think in a conformist way. It needed certain types of skill. It really interests me, for example, that we still educate kids by age. You know, it's like the most important thing they have in common is how old they are. You know, like their date of manufacture, you know, that all the 8-year-olds together, and all the 7-year-olds together, all the 10-year-olds together. So it's modeled on this culture of industrial need. But there's another thing going on here, you see, which is that there's also in education a particular model of intelligence. Most education systems, I think, confuse intelligence with academic ability. And so there's a view that some subjects are more important than others because they're intellectually more rigorous. And this is honestly just nonsense. It's based on a whole series of misconceptions about intelligence.
I was going to ask you, how should intelligence be judged? I know, for example, all the IQ tests, and IQ is that standard measure that people use for intelligence. It's very mathematically based.
Yeah, and it's an invention. You know, IQ as a system was developed quite recently, again in the 19th century. And it's based on the idea that everyone's born with a certain amount of intelligence, and you can judge it pretty quickly by a series of tests and give you a number for it. And these tests, for the most part, look for certain types of logical ability. Now, don't mistake me. I'm not saying they're not important, but they're not the whole of intelligence. I mean, if you were to imagine a world which only relied upon academic ability, most of human culture would never have happened. You know, there'd be no practical science, no technology, no business, no art, music, dance, architecture, no love, no feelings, no anything. I mean, that's a lot of stuff to leave out, you know, of a conception of intelligence. I mean, if all you had was academic ability, you couldn't have got out of bed this morning. In fact, there wouldn't have been a bed for you to get out of, you know, because nobody could have made it. You could have written about the possibility of one, you know, but you couldn't have constructed the thing. So we've ended up with this rather narrow view. I'll tell you what, a good analogy to me, it would be a bit like thinking of all forms of athletic ability purely in terms of the long jump, you know, and saying, well, you know, we know there are other people who can do, you know, we know there are other sports, you know, we know, there's the 100 meters, we know there's football, you know, we know there's basketball, but the really smart athletes are the guys who do, and women who do the long jump. So you'd have a whole system of athletic development programs which only look for long jumpers, and anybody else could do remedial programs in the 100 meters. Well, you know, we've got the same thing going in education. We look for people who can do this particular thing, and if you happen to be good at art or music or you think differently, well, that's nice, but it's not what we're looking for. And you know, the heart of this argument, Riz, for me is that may have worked in the 19th century. Actually, it didn't, but it might have, there might have been a good case for it. For the 21st century, we need a totally different conception of ability and talent. It's absolutely essential that we do it. Right. And that's why I think there's a crisis of human resources.
Well, so Ken, don't go away. We're going to take a very short break here, but we're back with more on this in just a few moments.